And so buyer centricity to me is something that you need to measure. And you need to sometimes change your KPIs a little bit. Like in marketing, we sometimes use open rates or clicks as an indicator, but that's not necessarily indicating that it resonated with the target audience.
Welcome to the Buyer-Centric OS. Buyer-Centric OS, a system for revolutionary customer experience. With your hosts, Andy Halko and Tony Zayas. This show helps you turn guesswork into growth by putting your buyer at the center of everything.
Hey everybody, welcome back to today's episode. And today we're going to be talking about growth coming from alignment and the idea that the funnel might be broken these days. So may not be the answer. Andy, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really about, again, creating momentum within an organization. And the Buyer-Centric Operating System is all about how do you center around the customer, your buyer, and create that momentum that really helps drive the whole organization forward. And if you don't do it correctly, it really breaks down and just causes stagnation. So I think, when organizations hit that plateau or they're feeling like they're hitting different challenges, the flywheel, which we're going to be talking about, is really a good model for understanding why that's happening.
Yeah, I would say when we think, funnels versus flywheels, the funnel is a little more rigid and it almost makes some assumptions about what the buyer's going to do. And so you map a funnel out anticipating they're going to make this move, then, move to stage B next or whatever. But the truth is that especially as people become more informed as they're moving through the process, we need to be more responsive and really kind of holistically. And that's what the flywheel does. It allows, us to add points throughout the process that can improve how we're engaging with the buyer. That's when I look at that graphic, I think about, it's all about that experience through every step in the stage.
For sure.
Process, I should say.
Yeah, and I'll bring up the flywheel and we can just talk about it a little bit. But, this is really part of that core model of the Buyer-Centric Operating System is that we have each of these major aspects of the business. And when you think of a flywheel, one of the first things you want to think about is that the goal is to get it to spin. You think of a flywheel, you think of that movement, right? And if you don't have it moving, you don't have that momentum, that's that stagnation that I talked about. And so what we look at with the flywheel is that if any of these areas don't have that momentum around your buyer, you're not getting the flywheel to move. And the good example of it is in build, which is the creation of your products or services. If you haven't done that where you're really centered on the buyer's needs, their pains, their challenges, solving for them, marketing and sales is going to struggle. The flywheel can't move because you haven't created a product that really resonates with your target audience. But let's say you create a great product, but your marketing really doesn't connect well with your target audience. And so, you may have this fantastic product, but you really have a hard time convincing people and having the positioning that really captures their attention and gets them to move forward. Again, your flywheel can't move. And sales, very similar, that if you, are able to attract folks, but once you get them into your sales process, whether that's a product and it's a free trial that you're trying to get people to upgrade into and that process fails, or if you've got sales reps that just aren't good at, convincing people and having the right mindset of how they connect and build rapport with buyers, then that sales isn't going to move. And this really just moves around the flywheel through delivery, where you're actually delivering your product, and then evangelization, where you're trying to create fans that tell other people about your product. And so for me, the flywheel is really this mindset of that you need each of these pieces centered around the buyer, thinking about their needs, and they have to move in sync. And if you have any of these pieces that isn't centered around that buyer, you're not going to get that momentum. And without that momentum, you're not going to see growth.
Yeah, so you really have to get teams on board and working along this buyer-centric approach. Like that is a requirement to get the flywheel moving. How do you think this? How do you think you take this and apply this to kind of that team thinking? Again, going back, I know we talked about this in a past episode, but kind of getting that buy-in from all of your, internal teams, because I think that's going to be a challenge throughout, is that every department, every role that is interfacing or supporting the buyer journey has to understand that buyer. So how does the flywheel kind of help them understand their part in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always have to go back to helping our teams understand that deeper connection, deeper understanding of our buyer, of our customer, is what makes our part of the business successful. That if we're in marketing, that we really understand that if we know that customer inside and out, we can speak to their pains, to their motivations. We can really truly understand them, that our marketing campaigns are going to be better, that in sales, that if we understand their buying triggers. And so we do have to start with that core of the organization understands the impact of being centered around the buyer. What I think the flywheel really helps communicate to the organization is that can't happen in a silo. You can't have a marketing team that is super engaged in the buyer and they love them and they focus on that and they really build their strategies around it, but a product team that doesn't care about the buyer and only cares about building innovative, cool features that they like, or a sales team that works off of ego and doesn't really focus on what the buyer needs. They just think, okay, I'm gonna, hound them until they're gonna come in and make a purchase. And so I think the flywheel, the piece to communicate to the organization is that this is not something that can happen in a silo. And if we don't have this buyer centricity across all of these different areas, there is no way our organization is going to move. There is no way that we are going to gain the momentum that we want for growth. And so I think that's the thing to communicate. If you're a leader, is that, hey, customer centricity, focusing on the buyer, understanding them, it starts with product, but it goes the whole way through marketing, sales, delivery, and service.
So does the flywheel, from your perspective, help teams rethink KPIs a little bit? Because what I'm trying to wonder is, how do you understand through like feedback that the flywheel is moving, or that the different pieces are moving, or what is broken?
So that's where you see that cadence and measurement. One of the things, it kind of sits on the inside and touches all of them. And cadence is really about setting that system and the patterns that are repeatable, that, it's not something that we randomly say, oh, well, for this campaign, we're going to really focus on buyer pains, but for the rest of our marketing, we're, just going to do whatever. Same thing with product. Hey, we're going to randomly survey a customer here and there, but we're not going to create a system and a cadence around getting buyer feedback and incorporating that into the business. So you need cadence for momentum, and you need measurement. Are we actually achieving what we want? And so buyer centricity to me is something that you need to measure. And you need to sometimes change your KPIs a little bit. Like in marketing, we sometimes use open rates or clicks as an indicator, but that's not necessarily indicating that it resonated with the target audience. So what you want to do is really look at how do you maybe combine some of those metrics to have a better sentiment of whether that buyer was engaged with the message and it resonated with them, rather than just a single action that, doesn't really indicate that there is true connection with them. And so across the organization, whether you're in product, you're in sales, what you want to do is shift your KPIs to understand not just did somebody do something, but did we actually, resonate and connect with our customer or buyer. And so when we get that cadence, the patterns, the systematic repeatability, and we measure it to understand, are we actually achieving what we want? That connects all of these pieces and helps drive that momentum forward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like how you said that kind of the cadence and measurement, those are necessary pieces in adopting buyer-centric. And I think that's a really important distinction, because if there isn't the cadence and measurement, then it is just going back to we're buyer-centric. It's just talking points, and it's not legitimate. It is not part of the culture. It is not something that is going to be, create a growth engine. So this is really fascinating. And I think that piece to me is something that is really interesting, is how do you now start measuring kind of on an organization-wide basis of these metrics that tie into buyer centricity.
Well, if you visualize it, really that cadence and measurement hold these pieces connected to the buyer, right? And you can imagine in your head, if you don't have that these pieces like attraction and acquire can spin off. They're not, they're not as connected. It's that gravity that holds them in. And so it's not only that we have to get each of those areas and optimize them for buyer centricity, but we need that cadence of measurement to be the gravity that holds them together as it spins. Because even the faster that it spins, the easier it is for it to pull away, right? That is kind of like the idea of, well, we're not going to get into physics here, but as it spins faster, these areas want to move away from the buyer. And we talked about that with our 4 forces, right, that cause people to move away from the buyer. Well, it's really that cadence of measurement that caused the gravity to pull those back and hold them in place even when you start spinning faster.
Yeah. And quite honestly, a lot of pieces in play here. And I think that's why the whole adoption of buyer-centric really is a practice that has to be coordinated. There has to be someone kind of leading, facilitating. Teams have to be on the same page, aligned, all of that. And this is a great illustration of why that is a necessity for this to be successful, but in such profound ways if you can deliver on it.
100%.
So really good stuff here. I think the flywheel is a outstanding concept to dive into. The book goes into some detail on this, and we'll continue on going further with helping you to understand how you can turn your organization into a buyer-centric organization. If you haven't checked out the book, as always, I mentioned, check it out. It's on Amazon, the Buyer-Centric Operating System, and we will see you guys next time. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for tuning into the Buyer-Centric OS. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and grab your copy of the Buyer-Centric Operating System by Andy Halko, available now on Amazon. For more tools and insights, visit andyhalko.com.